So I got caught off on talking about the shapes of bacteria, so I'm going to go ahead and go over those again. There are spherical shaped bacterial cells. These are called cocci, or coccus is a singular one. These are rounded spherical shaped bacteria, and of course Staphylococcus and Streptococcus are bacteria that are going to be this shaped type of bacteria. Then there are bacilli or bacillus, and these are rod-shaped bacteria. And Lactobacillus is a species, genus of rod-shaped. Lacto means milk, and bacillus is rod-shaped. And so a lot of bacteria like E. coli and Clostridium, those are all oval, elongated, rod-shaped bacteria, right? And then there are things called spirochetes, and these are corkscrew-type bacteria that are common in soil-type bacteria. And here's some examples of these. This is Staphylococcus, and you see the spherical-shaped bacteria. Over here is Clostridium, which is a bacillus, rod-shaped. And then you have these corkscrew ones. These are the spirochetes. Bacteria, some of bacteria are useful. They help us with certain things like digestion and make buttermilk or yogurt or stuff like that. But some bacteria are disease causers, and a disease-causing agent is called a pathogen. They form disease, make disease, and over half of the diseases that are around the world are actually eubacteria pathogens, are caused by these pathogens. These pathogens release or have toxins, which are poisons. There are two types of toxins. There's exotoxins and endotoxins. Exotoxins are actually secreted by the cell and cause disease in that way. These are the most toxic. We talked about Clostridium botulinum and Clostridium tetani. These are types of exotoxins. And then you have endotoxins, which are actually molecules that are in the cell wall that actually irritate the host, and these are things that are usually less toxic to humans. So that's chapter 6, the first part of chapter 16, dealing with the domains of archaea and bacteria. For the rest of the semester, we're going to look at organisms that are from the domain eukarya. Eukarya are the eukaryotic organisms. Those, remember, have a nucleus, a membrane around the DNA. And so the first kingdom that we're going to talk about in domain eukarya is Protista. Protistans are unicellular for the most part, meaning they have one cell. They can be either decomposers, mainly consumers, or producers. And depending on what type of feeding they do, will determine what group of protists that they would be classified in. And so the first group are slime molds. Slime molds are really interesting organisms. They are heterotrophic, and they are decomposers. So they are the decomposer group of the protozoans, and they feed on dead organic material, sometimes spores and algae and other things like that. And they have these amoeboid-like cells that kind of slide around on the surface of things. And when food becomes scarce, all these little cells come together and form this big mass. And this is a lot of times what you see. And they're usually brightly colored, orange, pink, yellow. And they move on to another area that might be better suited for them for food. And so here's a couple of examples of slime molds. If you're out in the woods, you see a dead, decaying log laying on the floor of the woods. It might have something like this on it, and that's what that is. It's a slime mold. Another type of protist is called a protozoan. Proto is early or first. Zoan refers to animals, so they're animal-like protists that are heterotrophic consumers. They depend on other organisms for food. And we're going to talk about 4 different types, and 3 of those types, the way they move, their locomotion type, is what's going to be most important. So especially for your test, your exam number 3. Remember, some of them are predators, some of them are parasitic, and some of them are called grazers. And that the term refers to anything that like feeds on algae and fungi. They're just sort of like microscopic cows. They just move around and eat algae and things like that. Sometimes, especially the parasitic ones, can form cysts, and these cysts are like shells around an organism, and they can allow the protozoan to withstand some extreme environmental condition. Once that condition has been eased and it's more normal, it will come out of that shell or cyst and then be viable again. So again, the most important thing on these types of protozoa are the way they feed and move. Okay, and so the first one are the amoeboid protozoa, and amoeba. There are other types as well that are common, but the amoeba is the most common. This is the one we think of, and they use cytoplasmic streaming or extensions of the cell body. The plasma membrane actually just moves in a direction, and the cytoplasm gets kind of drawn in with it, and it moves in those ways. And these things are called pseudopods. Pseudo is false, poda is foot, and so they move around by these things called pseudopods. So that would be the distinguishing characteristic for amoeboid protozoa. They feed on, some of them just feed on algae or other protozoa or things like that, but some are parasitic, one of which is called entamoeba histolytica, to be specific. And this is the causative agent of amoebic dysentery. We are blessed in the United States to have our water and wastewater processed. We sterilize water that we're going to drink, and we sterilize as much as we can the water that is wastewater. And so we have reduced the risk of parasites and of other diseases because of these processes. In other places they don't. So if you're traveling in third world countries especially, you are wanting not to drink the water, right? Or eat ice, because both of those can carry this amoeboid protozoa called entamoeba. And once in the body, the amoeba eats the fleshy cells in the intestine. The intestine then doesn't work right, and instead of some of that material being absorbed, it just goes through the system at a very fast rate, if you know what I mean. And so you don't want to have maybe dysentery going on when you're out on a vacation somewhere. So you want to make sure that you don't drink the water or eat ice. Radiolarians and foraminiferae, they form glass shells around the cell, and so those can be, once the cells die, those shells fall to the bottom of the ocean, along with these things called diatoms that we're going to talk about here in a second. And those two things together form the really powdery sediment on the floor of the ocean. They feed by this thing called phagocytosis. When the pseudopod moves toward an object of food, it will form two pseudopods that will go around the food and then eventually come together and trap the food inside the body. And if you see this amoeba here, you can see pseudopods right there. That's how it moves. And then these two pseudopods are encircling a piece of food. As it gets into the body, those two pseudopods come together and it engulfs the food, and then the food is dissolved and allows for energy to occur within the amoeba. The second type of protozoa is called the ciliated protozoa, and these have cilia. Remember chapter 4 we talked about cilia being the short hair-like structures that allow for movement, and they move around, they dart around water with these little hair-like structures called cilia. Paramecium is the one that is most common in most stream water or pond water. If you get some of those, some pond water and put it on a slide, look at it under a microscope, you'll see these guys just darting around a lot. They feed on all sorts of different algae and fungal spores and other protozoa. They do have a central vacuole like plant cells that allow them to osmoregulate, water balance, and then also to help store cell waste. They reproduce asexually and by budding or by fission. They just pinch apart, but they also reproduce semi-sexually by exchanging micronuclei. They have two different nuclei, macro, the large one, and then a micro that has some DNA in it as well. And when two come together, they swap these micronuclei, and it allows for some genetic diversity. So here's a paramecium, and if you look at the slides at home, you'll see that there's a faint halo around it, and those are all those cilia that allow it to move around really quickly. The third group are flagellated protozoa, and these have long whip-like structures. We talked about them in chapter 4 as well. Some examples are Giardia, which is intestinal diarrhea type parasite in humans. It's found in mammals. It doesn't matter if you're in a very mountain pristine stream. If you drink the water, there is a risk of you getting Giardia, because there are mammals out in those woods. Does a bear poop in the woods, right? It does. So there's a chance that there could be Giardia in the stream. And so you do not want to get it, especially if you're hiking or camping, hunting at high altitudes in very remote places. You definitely don't want to get Giardia, because it can cause you to dehydrate and can put yourself in a sort of a life-threatening position. And so you need to make sure, if you're going to rely on water sources that are natural, that you take a filter with you so that you filter out Giardia and other types of parasites. Trichomonas is a type of flagellated protozoa that can cause actually sexually transmitted disease. The last one is Trypanosoma, which is a really cool parasite. It is the causative agent of African sleeping sickness and Chagas disease. African sleeping sickness, of course, would be from the continent of Africa, and the trypanosome lives in the salivary glands of this little fly called a tsetse fly. The tsetse fly then bites another mammal or a human and injects the trypanosome into the bloodstream. The trypanosome then attacks the red blood cells, causing anemia and death if not treated. Treatment is available, but it is not very common, and so it does not many people are able to get the treatment, and so if they do have African sleeping sickness, it's a fatal type of condition. The other is Chagas disease, similar trypanosome, but it lives in the salivary gland of a bug, a true bug that actually dines on human blood, all right, and other mammals' bloods. If the trypanosome is in the salivary gland and the bug comes into a bedroom and then bites the human, probably around the mouth because that's really soft, what happens is, as it is feeding, it defecates. And what happens if you have something biting you, you kind of smack at it, right? When you smack at it, you might actually take the feces and move it into the wound, and then the trypanosome gets into the bloodstream, and once it gets into the bloodstream, it attacks the red blood cells, and you get Chagas disease. It is fairly common in South America, Central America. We don't have the same type of true bugs that they do, and we also have sealed houses, so they don't. Even if we did have those, it would be hard for them to get inside the house. Looking for, it has moved into southern United States, but mostly it's a dog problem because dogs are outside. They get into the dog house. The bug does take a blood meal, and it defecates, and of course dogs like to lick, and they lick it into the bloodstream that way. And so it is a problem, especially in South America. They move around again by long whip-like structures called flagella.